Good morning, Detective Chief Superintendent Campbell.
Good
Will
morning,
you take
sir.
the oath?
Yeah.
I swear by Almighty
I
God
swear by Almighty God
that I will tell the truth,
that I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the
and
truth.
nothing but the truth.
Miss Graham.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You are Detective Chief Superintendent Patrick Campbell.
I am, thank you.
What age are you?
I am 51 years of age.
And how many years service do you have?
I have completed 27 years.
And in 2015, you were a detective superintendent.
I was.
And that was for local policing in the whole of Lothian and Borders.
That's correct.
And we've heard, I think, one of our previous witnesses, Colin Robson, say that you were in charge on the 3rd of May of basically the east of Scotland.
Yes, that's correct.
And that were you the on-duty detective superintendent for the east of Scotland?
For the east of Scotland, yes.
And did that include Kirkcaldy?
It did, yes.
Thank you. We've also heard that you were a very busy man that day. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, I was, yeah.
I'll ask you more about that later.
Yeah.
There's a blue folder in front of you, as you can see.
Yeah.
And what we've done is we've provided you with hard copies of all of your statements and things. Now, if at any time you want to have a look at any of those, that folder is for your use, and please feel free to make any use of it.
Okay, thank you.
If I'm going to refer you to a document, it will also come up on the screen. And on the screen, we have redacted copies of things which we can display. But if you prefer the hard copy, you do have it.
Okay, that's great.
Can we first of all look at, I'll take you through all your statements. PS 00288, and I think this is an operational statement by you. So it's got your name at the top, and if we look at the date, it says the 19th of May 2015 at 1500 hours, and it's a self-penned statement that you wrote at Livingston Police Station.
Yep.
So this was just over 2 weeks after the events.
Yes.
And I think you say in your inquiry statement that you did your best when you wrote this to be accurate and to be honest about the events you were describing.
I did, yes.
Thank you. Now, in addition, I think you have 7 statements that you gave to PERC. And first of all, before I go through these in turn, can you explain why there were so many?
Yeah, I think it's really due to the kind of extensive role I had on the 3rd of May. Involvement in various strands, as obviously we will discuss. Also, at the time, I was still operationally deployed as a detective superintendent within an area dealing with live incidents. So to take maybe 1 or 2 days out of your week, it was really difficult. So it was more kind of ad hoc statements, and they were split over quite a significant period of time to facilitate basically my work schedule more than anything at all. I think that's probably the best way to explain it.
So PERC would come multiple times to fit in with the busy work schedule that
Correct.
you had?
Yes.
Thank you. Let's start with the first one, PERC 211, and this should be a statement to PERC dated the 19th of June. And you'll see that on the screen. And it was taken by investigator Karine Pattenden at Livingston Police Office. And I'll just go through the basic details at the beginning of each statement before I ask you 1 or 2 questions. The next one is PERC 212. And this was then taken on the 3rd of July 2015, again at Livingston Police Office. And do you recognise that?
I do, yes. Yeah.
And then the 6th of July 2015 was a statement PERC 213. Again, taken at Livingston.
Yes.
And you recognise that as well?
I do.
The 7th of July 2015, PERC 214. Do you see that?
Yep.
on the screen, again taken at Livingston.
Yes.
And then 215, dated the 8th of July 2015, again at Livingston. You were based at Livingston Police Office at the time,
I
were
was
you?
based between Livingston and Dalkeith. I had an office at both offices, yeah.
And then we have one for the 15th of July 2015, Perk 216.
Yeah.
So that was essentially 6 statements that we've looked at on the screen between the 19th of June and the 15th of July.
Yes.
All given by you at Livingston Police Office to Perk.
Yes.
You recognise
I do.
all of them. You've had an opportunity in the past to look at all
I
of
have,
them, haven't
yes.
you?
Yeah.
And were all of them your best efforts to be accurate and true in your recollection?
Yes, they were.
Thank you. And then finally, there was another Perk statement given in January 2018. So almost 3 years later, 12th January 2018. And this is Perk 217. And again, have you had a chance to look through that statement?
Yes, I have.
And again, was that true and accurate?
Yes, it was.
Thank you. Now, I think in your inquiry statement at paragraph 13, for those that are looking, you've said your memory then was probably better than it maybe is now.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah.
Lots of witnesses have said the same to us. So if there's a difference between your first set of Perk statements, say in 2015, and your evidence now, we'll obviously ask you if to talk about any of that. But if there is a difference when the chair looks at that later, should he prefer your Perk statements or should he prefer your evidence? Or do you not want to be that general?
Yeah, it's pretty kind of generalisation, to be honest with you. I don't think I'd like to be specific around that.
That's absolutely fine. Now, if we hear that Perk did have some difficulties getting a statement out of you, you're nodding. I think you would accept that, would you?
Yes.
Right. Do you want to make any comment about that?
No, I think it was quite challenging to facilitate the time that Perk were looking to speak to me during that busy period in my service. But other than that, I did my best to accommodate it.
I wondered if you'd like to say anything about the pressures on you at that time in terms of the work you were doing. You've talked about being on duty and as a detective superintendent. Could you help us understand to some extent the type of work you were involved in at that time?
Yeah, it's so there's a detective superintendent for each of the territorial divisional areas, so it's a really busy portfolio looking after major crime, local crime, public protection issues within that particular territorial area. And also in 2015, it was the very early stages of Police Scotland, so again, some legacy issues still existed within particular areas, so again, it was quite a challenging role at that time to look at bringing everyone together into Police Scotland as such, and even 2 years, 2013 obviously we became Police Scotland, but 2 years at 2015 there were still challenges around about access to IT, as we'll probably hear, around about bringing together standard operating procedures and legacy issues and policies that were being merged into a national policy as such was still in the stages of going through. So that aside, you had, I had oversight of all significant crime matters within that particular area, Lothian and the Scottish borders, which was a huge area, covering west, east, Lothian, as well as the Scottish borders. And other than that, there was other aspects I still carried with me through my portfolio around about leading on particular areas for Police Scotland, such as I led on identification around about some of the issues that we were looking at through identification as a national role, and also had involvement and quite a significant cold case, which I had dealt with earlier on in my service, but due to the very nature of it, I kept that as the kind of lead SIO officer on it. So as well as the local issues, I still had some national portfolio issues and other legacy areas that I was still basically running with at that particular time.
Was that a cold case from the Lothian and Borders
No,
area?
it was a cold case from Lanarkshire.
Right, so actually still continuing with a case from a different area as well?
Yeah. And it was a case that obviously had a lot of media attention around it at the time, and just with the liaison and the close contact I built up with the family, it was deemed appropriate that I continued with the SIO aspect of that particular case.
And did that take up a lot of your time as well?
It did, yes. So as I say, it led to areas such as exhumation of various graves and things such as that at the time, and also ran about further significant searches of areas within the Lanarkshire area for the remains of this particular individual. So as I say, it took up quite a significant period of time as well.
Is that case gone to trial now? Is that completely finished?
So yeah, it's basically the male deemed to be responsible is deceased. So it was dealt with at that time and led by the Lord Advocate Frank Mulholland. And as I say, the focus just now and still is on the recovery of the remains of the particular individual. This is a case going back to 1957 within Coatbridge in Lanarkshire. So as I say, there is no aspect of prosecution still to be progressed around it. It's simply body recovery just now, unfortunately.
Right. And you've talked about the sort of the jurisdiction and the area that you were working on at that time. Can you give us some sense of understanding about the number of cases or the number of people that you were involved in?
Yeah, so no, I mean, I had oversight of all CID, public protection, intelligence personnel within that divisional area, which was around about 350, 400. 400. 400, yeah, within that particular area. So you had that strategic oversight of all crime-related matters. You were part of that divisional executive team led by a divisional commander. So you were responsible for that, the feed of anything that was ongoing into your command team as such, which thereafter you progressed that through into the Executive Police Scotland at the time.
So that's not the population, that's the number of ongoing matters that you're actually dealing with?
No, sorry, maybe...
It's maybe my
so
misunderstood.
I think you asked about how many resources, so it was roughly about 400 resources within Lothian and Borders that I had oversight of.
Is within that officers and staff?
And sergeants and staff, and
right.
So that's encompassing intelligence, public protection and crime investigation.
I see. Sorry.
But thereafter you are dealing with aspects that emerge. So through the 3 years I was there was homicides, there was significant public protection investigations, there was I was in charge of an external review as well with the Scottish Government. There was significant other crime matters you were dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So as I say, it was anything emerging, it was lifetime investigations you were thereafter basically overseen strategically.
We've heard evidence that things can come in urgently or as emergencies and have to be dealt with very quickly.
Yeah.
Is that the sort of day-to-day reality of the job you were doing at the time?
So I mean, you are basically you are reacting to, as well as being proactive to some of the investigations, but you are reacting to incidents that are developing through the course of any particular day. And thereafter, when you are on call, as I was on the 3rd of May, you have multiple divisional areas to look after, so you're on call for a 7-day period, so anything out with normal working hours, so anything after 5 o'clock through to 7 o'clock the next morning, and all through the course of any weekend, that you have the whole east of the country to basically manage the crime aspect of that, if that makes sense. The force itself, and still is, divided into 3 particular areas, so north, west and east, and there'd be a detective superintendent such as myself that would have that responsibility for each of the territorial areas across the country.
It sounds very busy.
Yes.
And was there any time to sleep during that 7-day period? You don't have to answer
Yeah,
that
yeah.
question. So, on, I've slightly taken you away from the statements that we were looking at, but the statements you gave to PERC were given during that period that you were working as Detective Superintendent.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Thank you. Can we look now at what's called a Rule 8 response, SBPI 00134. Now, we've heard of these from other witnesses, and just so that the public understand, this is when you receive a number of questions from the inquiry team.
Yes.
They were written questions, and you were then given the opportunity to respond to those in writing. And this is what happened
Yes.
here. You were sent a number of questions, and you then prepared a response to that Rule 8 request.
I did, yes.
So essentially, this is the first statement, if you like, to the inquiry
Yes.
from you. And we'll see it on the screen. You've got a hard copy as well.
Yeah.
And if we look towards the bottom of that document, we will see that it was signed on the 16th of May last year.
Yep, that's correct.
So if we can go right to the bottom, please. And you'll see your signature's been redacted, but the date you signed it is there at the bottom.
Yeah.
And there are 25 answers to 25 questions. And then at the end, there's a paragraph that says, I've answered these questions to the best of my recollection, but without access to all relevant material. Notwithstanding this, I believe the facts in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website. And you understood that.
Yes,
you were
I did.
asked to put that paragraph in, and you understood that would be the position when you signed it.
Yes, I did.
Thank you. And then can we look at SBPI 00256? This is an inquiry statement. So effectively the second contact that you had with the inquiry team. And it was taken by a member of the inquiry team on the 10th, 11th, 17th of November and the 14th of December last year.
Yes.
So there were a number of discussions with you and the inquiry team, and those are the correct dates.
Yeah, yes.
And then, as I understand the procedure, you're sent a typed draft, if you like, statement.
Yeah.
You were then given the opportunity to go over that, make any changes that you wished to make,
Yes.
additions, redactions, removing things, altering wording, and then you would get a fresh version incorporating all the changes, which you would then be asked to sign.
Yes.
And if we can look at the bottom of your statement, it's 117 pages, and we will see that it's, on your copy you'll see you've signed it on every page. We have a redacted version on the screen, and it was signed by you on the 1st of February this year.
Correct.
Thank you. And that was on the basis you were content with the final format
Yes.
as you amended it. And again, if we look at the final paragraph, which is 499, you do say there is relevant documentation that I have not yet seen. I believe to the best of my knowledge that the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website.
Yes.
And in light of that, you signed it. Now, just so that people understand, it's been said publicly in the inquiry that disclosure to core participants such as yourself is on an ongoing basis. So much documentation has been disclosed, which you've had an opportunity to speak to your
Yes.
advisors about, but that disclosure will continue as we continue with our work. So I think this is, you've just wanted to say here that you've not yet seen everything,
Yes.
because we're continuing to disclose on an ongoing basis.
Yes, that's correct.
And if something new comes to light over the next few months or later, you'll obviously have a copy of that because you're a core participant,
Yeah.
but you've reserved the right to maybe comment on that in the future if there's something else.
Yes, that's correct.
So this statement was signed on the basis of the information you had
At
to
that time,
date.
yes, yeah.
Thank you. That's great. Right, there's 3 other things I'd like you to have in front of you. As part of your statement, you talk about a day book.
Yes.
Now, we've heard some evidence about day books and the use they're made of by other officers. And would you look please at PS 18269. Now, we've got a version on the screen. If you give me a moment, I'll take you through that. But if the pages I'm particularly interested in, which haven't been redacted, are roughly about 5, 6, 7, 8, and they've got handwriting on them. And you see that handwriting on the screen at the moment?
I do.
Is that yours?
That is, yeah.
And as I understand it, this is an extract from your day book.
It is, yeah.
Now, you'll see that's very, very small. It's been condensed in size to get it onto the screen. But I've asked if the hard copy could be made available to you today. Now, would you have a look at that?
Yeah.
Is that your original day book?
Yeah, that's correct.
I thought it may be easier for you to have the full-sized version.
Absolutely.
You'll see that there's a pink post-it at the beginning which should be marked in this to highlight the page that we also see on the screen. Now, you'll appreciate that your original book is not redacted, but the versions on the screen have had things like personal addresses and details removed.
Yes.
So as we go through the pages, where there's a redaction, I'll ask you not to read out any personal addresses.
Yeah.
You will have that in front of you as we go through it. For the chair's benefit, can you explain how you used a day book in May 2015?
Yeah, it was basically the day book is mainly used by detectives. I've used it for the last 25 years of my police service. It mainly documents your day-to-day activities, what you're responding to and what you're managing and dealing with. So, for example, you would date it at the day you come on duty and the time you come on duty, and thereafter, if you're attending meetings or whatever else, you would maybe note down anything at all relevant. If you're dealing with a particular incident, as I was, I would detail that within my day book. Detailing it within your police issue notebook is virtually impossible, to be honest with you. You would go through a notebook a week, dealing with some of the incidents we deal with and how detailed some of them become. So it's far more effective and far more easier to use an A4 type day book to manage particular incidents and detail your thoughts and your priorities around that, other than trying to manage it within a small notebook, if that makes sense.
What size is your notebook?
Goodness, it's a gradual. It's a really small document.
Smaller than the day book?
It's a really small. Usually, it kind of fits in the pocket of your jacket almost. You know what I mean? Type thing. That's the way it was designed, and it was designed for, as the name suggests, for taking notes, not for taking more extensive details of particular significant incidents that you may be dealing with as such. So it's far more effective to manage it within, as we call, a day book, and that's now common across Scotland.
And you said when you come on duty you might start a new page and see. Are the notes prepared contemporaneously to events happening, or
Yes.
they appear not retrospectively?
Not retrospective, no.
So if you have notes from the 3rd of May 2015, they would have been prepared on the 3rd of May 2015?
Yeah, they're lifetime notes that I've detailed at the time.
Thank you. And what do you do with the notes that you take in that day book?
So I think everyone's got a different method of how they manage their day books. I keep all my day books in a particular manner. I store them all, I date them all, I number them all, and the notes are thereafter utilised for any subsequent investigation or review that may be carried out. You can thereafter go back and refer to your day book at that particular day or date around that. So, as I say, if it's to thereafter note a full statement from yourself, you can thereafter go back and say, well, I can recall that 6th of December I was here and this is what I've noted for it, and that thereafter you can note your operational statement from the notes you've taken at that particular time.
I understand that, in fact, you had the day book with you when you gave your inquiry statement, is that right?
I did, yes.
And was that the same when PERC took statements from you?
It was. They seized my day book at the end of that, I think. Yeah.
And then can I ask you to look at something else? It's PS 17854. Now, I think in your inquiry statement at paragraph 482, you call this an SIO management policy file. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. And there should be a hard copy of that in your blue folder. Let's just have a look at... this is headed up on page 1 on the screen, Death in Police Custody Investigation, Sheku Bio. And then if we can carry on, you see your name, Detective Superintendent Pat Campbell. And then if we can, yes, if you could just come down slightly so I can, no, sorry, up. So that's it. So at the top we see the heading Management Policy File, and it says decision number 1. And is each decision numbered chronologically?
They are, yes.
And we'll see on the top right there of that page the number 61451. So that's effectively page 51 or page 1 of...
Yeah.
And can we move down slightly? And just looking at this page, the top part says decision. So can you explain to us what this policy file is?
Yeah, so the policy file is something that we would utilise for any major incident, critical incident or significant incident that you're managing or you're SIO for or Senior Investigating Officer for. So you wouldn't deal with or you wouldn't raise a management policy file for any normal day-to-day matter. It would be a more significant incident. So for example, if I was dealing with a homicide, I would begin a management policy file around that and it would document when you look at the guidance for it and the training around it, it's not a decision-making log. It's to basically it's more about your strategic priorities and your strategic decisions, not every decision you make. So it's the kind of high-level decisions that you would make in responding to a particular incident as such, but it is only for those high-level, those critical, those significant incidents that you would deal with.
Can you give us some examples generally so we can understand what you mean when you say high-level decisions?
Yeah, so I normally, and people, the various senior investigating officers set them out differently, you know what I mean? But for example, that aspect of the page that you're looking at just now is the initial notification of the incident and the direction for me to be appointed as Senior Investigating Officer. So again, it's just that introductory aspect, that the telephone call from who was Detective Chief Superintendent Leslie Bowell at the time, asking me to attend Kirkcaldy office to thereafter take on the role of SIO in respect of the ongoing incident. So again, that was really significant. So again, just the appointment of myself as SIO as that strategic decision is something there to make. But again, the decision to, for example, contact various detective inspectors around the country to look at resources probably wouldn't document in that. That would be more a kind of lower level decision round about the bureaucracy of managing and resourcing a major incident, if that makes sense. So it would be your high level, round about areas such as identification protocols, appointment of family liaison officers, forensic capture, so on and so forth. So it's those kind of high level strategic pillars of an investigation you would probably detail within your management policy file.
Right. And as you mentioned here, we can see the decision is noted here as 7:45 hours. And then can you read what this says?
Yeah, so basically 0745 informed via telephone call from DCS Leslie Bowl of developing incident within Kirkcaldy area in respect of male following arrest by police has now been conveyed to hospital and is giving significant cause for concern. Requested by DCS Bowl to attend Kirkcaldy Police Office as a matter of urgency and provide strategic direction for investigation. Requested to liaise with MIT, which is a major investigation team, on-call detective inspector to identify relevant resources.
So this was a call you received from DCS Leslie Bowl?
That's correct.
And that was at 7:45 in the morning?
It was actually 0815.
Sorry, I thought that
yeah,
said...
it does say 0745 hours, but after looking at my day book, it was actually 0815. The call at 7:45 was a further call I made to Leslie, not to do with this incident. So it was a bit of confusion when I was actually penning my policy file around that, but that call was at 8:15.
Right. Now, I'll ask you to explain that in a bit more detail, but you mentioned your day book, and one of the things I wanted you to explain is how information in your day book relates to information in this policy file.
Yeah, so again, it's extremely difficult to detail and note your decisions that you make at that particular time within your management policy file, responding to a lifetime incident when there's multiple things that you actually have to manage and deal with. So the guidance and the best practice in respect to policy files is they should be completed as soon as reasonably practical around that. So again, what I do is that I would detail significant decisions and issues and areas that I would want to thereafter transfer into my policy file in my day book, and thereafter when I had time, such as a quiet hour later on that day or whatever, I would thereafter sit down and thereafter transfer some of the significant decisions I had made from my day book into my management policy file.
So you use the day book first?
Yes.
For your notes in lifetime contemporaneous?
Yes.
This file will take information from the day book and you will prepare it retrospectively, perhaps the same day, but after the day book? Yes. And can entries in the policy file also be completed days after, or is it only on the day?
They can be, but again, with this particular incident, I think I completed it on the 4th of May, because I handed my policy file over on the morning of the 5th of May to DCI Keith Hardy. So my management SIO policy file, what you do is, if there's a further SIO coming on to take on the investigation, I would simply detail in it, hand it over to DCI Keith Hardy from Major Investigation Team, and Keith would also receive policy file from DSU Patrick Campbell, now lead for investigations. So again, this one was completed on the 4th. I think just there was a notation on the 5th just about the handover to Keith Hardy.
So the day book's prepared on the day, on the 3rd of May. Yeah. The policy file, you said, completed on the 4th. Mm-hmm. So a day later, I think from information in the day book.
So I started to complete it on the morning of the 4th, as in like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning of the 4th.
Early hours.
Early hours, yeah.
Based on information in the day book?
Yeah.
Or your recollection and the day book. And then on the 5th of May, you handed over the policy file to Hardy?
Yes.
And that was the end of you completing
the
policy file. And while we're on this page, you were talking about the the call from Leslie Bowl, and you said it was 8:15 actually about the incident.
Yeah.
And you said when you checked your daybook. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so Leslie Bowl at that time on the 3rd of May was the senior officer from the crime portfolio that was on duty within Police Scotland as on call. So as I said before, there would be 3 detective supers for each of the territorial areas from east, west and north. We would manage crime-related matters within each of the districts, and thereafter we would contact Leslie on a morning-to-morning basis before she attended the executive meeting with the ACC who would be on call, and provide an update round about that 24-hour grab of crime, public protection matters. So again, it would feed into Leslie. Leslie would feed into the force executive almost round about these are the pertinent and relevant crime matters that are developing just now across the country. So the 7:45 hours call would be myself basically giving Leslie a brief from the east of the country around crime matters other than the incident at Kirkcaldy, but other matters that were developing. So that day I think we had an unexplained child death, for example. We had, I think we had a stranger rape. We had a number of different other matters ongoing. So I would feed into Leslie around about these other matters at that call. And it wasn't until 8:15 that we discussed in more detail around about the incident at Kirkcaldy.
So is this you were the on-call detective superintendent. You were on for 7 days.
Yes.
Was the 3rd of May your first day?
No, so we at that time it was now I think we ran Wednesday to Wednesday,
Right.
so that was just
Halfway through.
halfway through, yeah.
And was this a normal sort of call with
Yeah.
Leslie Bowl at 7:45
Yeah,
that
you-
you would have every day?
Yeah, 7:30, 7:45. Leslie would get into the briefing with the ACC around about 8:30. So again, we would feed into Leslie just about the relevant matters that were occurring across the country.
So that was a normal start
Yes.
to the morning. And then at 8:15, she calls you back
Yes.
and informs you about the incident in
That's correct.
Kirkcaldy. And was that the first you heard about that incident?
So Colin Robson had gave me information earlier that there had been an altercation within Kirkcaldy, but I didn't get any more information at that time around it. That's been, again, just to complicate things even further, each of the divisional areas that I'm looking after within the east of the country, so the 4 divisions have an on-call detective inspector. So Colin Robson was the on-call detective inspector for Fife. So Colin would feed into me regarding crime matters for that particular area. It's almost like a pyramid system, and I would thereafter, he would feed into me, I would feed up to Leslie, Leslie would feed into the force executive as such. So I was aware that there was an incident, but I didn't have very much details of it at all. All I was aware that Colin was going to provide me with an update as the day progressed.
We actually heard from Colin Robson that, and we have airwaves, I don't need you to go to this, but he mentioned on an airwaves message at 7:43:05 from Hayfield Road that he was making various calls and he'd spoken to Chief Inspector Stones, updated him, and he was going to contact the on-call super. And his evidence was that he did in fact
He did,
make
yeah.
a call to you shortly after
Yes.
that airwaves message. So would that be the call?
It was, yes. It was very brief because, as I say, I was still managing other aspects across the regional area at that time, and I wasn't aware of the significance of it at that particular stage.
Do you remember what Colin Robson told you about?
I genuinely can't. It was a really short call, just the fact that there had been an incident in Kirkcaldy, and that he was waiting on a further update, and he would contact me as soon as around it. So it was really kind of short around the information I had at that time about it.
Would we be able to see anything in your daybook that notes it?
No, I don't think there is anything I can check.
Would you?
Yeah. No, I think the only thing that there is and I think this is after the incident. There's a mark on the page after it's been highlighted here about Kirkcaldy stroke mitts.
Right,
I don't know if you have that.
If we could get that back on the screen. So that's from the daybook, that's PS 18269.
And I think it's just the page before.
Just the page, right, thank you. If you keep, we can see on that page there, it says Sunday 3rd May 2015. If we go down, please. It says E division, P division, and then keep going down. The redactions will redact anything that doesn't relate to the events at Hayfield Road. And then we see, is that J division?
Yeah.
E division, keep going please. And then there's an entry with an asterisk, Kirkcaldy mitts.
Yeah.
Is that the one you're referring to?
Yeah, so I think that's after I've spoken to Leslie Bow. I don't think I've noted anything from Colin Robson's phone call at the time.
Right, all right, no, that's...
Because that links back to the entry around about to make contact with the MITs around about resources.
Right, so can you just read that out for us since we're looking at it on the screen? Kirkcaldy mitts,
Yes. So two officers approached Mayland Street walking wounded. So that refers just now that there was an injured officer. So it's just shorthand for myself, but I recall what that was. And thereafter, the line below that is CPR. So I think it was noted that CPR had basically commenced. And
can you read
I can't
what's
read.
after that?
I don't know if that says DSU or on call, or whatever. I don't know what that word is in the middle, but on call. So I don't know if that's in respect of looking at the on-call MITs to make that phone call around about resources, but it's just the early notations around the incident as I was beginning to get it through as such.
So by the time you've made this entry, you're aware that something's happened in Kirkcaldy?
Yes.
And whether that was from Leslie Bowl or Colin Robson?
I think it was Leslie.
You think that was
Yeah,
Leslie?
yeah.
And when it says two officers approached, what does that mean?
So, as I say, it's really shorthand, and it was just the early stages of the information that I was getting at the time, round about that the initial, as I recall, the initial two officers in attendance had been approached by a male in the street, and one of them had been injured but was walking wounded, as it was described to me. There was no significant injury at all to the individual.
And just for completeness, there's nothing on the next page about this, is there?
No.
It moves on to a different
Yeah,
phase.
yeah.
If we could look at that on the screen so everyone can see. So that appears to be the end of the entries in relation to that.
Yes, I think the only thing above it is the details of 2 E division, 2 C division, 2 J division and 2 MITs. So that was about the identification of early resources to come and assist the investigation at that time. So I'd identified resources from the surrounding divisional areas, even at that early stage, to come to Kirkcaldy immediately to start to manage the incident.
You think that's part of the redaction part?
Yeah. No, it's the other aspect of it,
Oh,
see,
no,
to the
that's-
right of it, yeah.
Right, thank you. Right, we can put that to one side, but there's another sorry, can we go back to the policy file, please? We were on a page relating to that. We're looking at the one that started 7:45. And then if we can move down the screen, do we see there that there's another section on that page that says reason? Now, what is it that you insert in this?
So it's the decision that's been made, and thereafter the reason would be the justification why that decision has been made and the rationale behind it.
So what have you said here?
So basically what I put there is that obviously that incident has occurred. The significance of the incident is known at that stage, that from the discussions with Leslie, it was clear that there was going to be quite a significant investigation around what had occurred. So she'd asked me to attend to provide strategic lead for the investigation at that early stage. So what I put down there is the reason or the rationale for me attending is to attend and provide strategic direction for the investigation, and also to identify suitable resources within the major investigation team structure to support any potential inquiry.
Right. And effectively, was that you being appointed by Leslie Bowl as SIO?
Yes.
So was that the moment that your appointment was made sort of official, if you like?
Yeah, so that discussion at 8:15 into about 8:20, 8:30 was around about what we were looking at was a death in police custody, or if it didn't actually become a death, we were looking at a significant investigation around about police contact, which had led to significant injury. So the aspect of that was the fact that it was deemed to be appropriate, and I agreed with Leslie that a detective superintendent should lead on that investigation. In legacy forces, prior to Police Scotland coming online, the standard at that time for Strathclyde Police, which I was part of, was that any death in custody should be dealt with and managed by an officer no less than the rank of a detective superintendent. And again, so I fully supported Leslie's decision to take the lead on this.
And just for completion, can we look at decision number 8? And this is at page 61457. The numbers are at the top of the page. So, thank you. Keep going. So that's decision number 8 in the book, 61457. And do we see there the decision? Can you read that out for us, please?
Yeah, identification of so identification of single point of contact. I don't know what that word says actually. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I
Identification of
can read it
single
either.
points of contact and strategies to take forward the investigation. So it's my early kind of thoughts around about. I mean, the priorities was the crime scene or the scenes, the forensic strategy, the house-to-house strategy and what that entailed, victim strategy as well as the flow strategy, which I've detailed there. So they begin to look at that investigative framework to manage the investigation.
So 4 things that were viewed at that stage as strategies to take the investigation forward.
Yes.
And one of them is crime scene or forensic strategy.
I would suggest crime scene and forensic strategy.
Crime scene and forensic strategy. And then if we move down to the reason, what does that say?
That's to provide governance and framework for the investigation.
Right. And then could you look please at another document, and again you'll have a hard copy of this, PS 01298, which we see is a forensic strategy document. And if we can move down, please. So we have this on the screen. It's a separate document entitled Forensic Strategy for in relation to the deceased Mr. Bio. And if we can move down, I think it's only about 4 pages, if I remember rightly. And this sets out a summary of events, and then as we move down onto the next page, page 3 of 7, you'll see priorities listed, and there are a number of loci listed with bullet points under each.
Yes.
And then keep going, please. That comes to an end on page 5 of 7. And then my copy, as we go into page 6 of 7, is a forensic strategy meeting, 16:45 hours on Sunday, the 3rd of May, at Kirkcaldy Police Station. You were present.
Yeah,
at
chaired that meeting.
And as was a Detective Chief Inspector Stuart Houston. And that's is this an agenda for the meeting?
No, I think this is
Or
a minutes.
minutes.
Yeah, there is an
Minutes.
agenda. I don't know if the agenda is part of the document.
It's not
pack.
part of this document.
There is a
but-
separate agenda, yeah.
Yeah, but this is the minutes of the meeting showing who was present.
Yeah.
Now, can you explain to the chair We have your policy file mentioning a forensic strategy, crime scene forensic strategy. We see this document, which is a forensic strategy document. Tell us how this document comes into being.
Yeah, so for any significant incident, any homicide, major crime response that we are dealing with, 9 times out of 10 we'll move towards some sort of forensic strategy meeting. So, for example, if it's a homicide, we would schedule that for as soon as reasonably practical to get the relevant individuals and specialists around the table. So, for example, for a homicide, we'd have the SIO, Senior Investigating Officer, the crime scene manager, some production officers. We would have the Procurator Fiscal representative. We would have some of the specialists from the forensic side, such as a biologist. We would have somebody from scene examination. So again, what we would have a cadre of specialists around a particular table to thereafter develop the forensic priorities that exist for that particular incident. So that will be about what is deemed to be most appropriate, what specialists should be put in first to a particular scene to ensure that we capture the optimum evidence at that particular stage. So again, I will, as SIO chairing that, I would take advice from the various specialists saying, well, we should maybe put someone in first, or when we recover the body, this is the best way to do that. Or do we need a pathologist out at this particular time? So it would be after the scene is secure, we would basically take a step back at that time and thereafter come round the table with the specialists involved in it. And identify what the priorities are. So basically this is what's occurred here. We are basically having the specialists around the table looking at what are the priority areas, what's PIRC going to lead on or take on as such, and what are Police Scotland going to support them with, and where are the priority scenes. So it's a priority scene first of all, is it Hayfield Road, for example, because that's where the incident occurred. It's a thoroughfare. We knew the weather was poor, or again one of the other scenes, and the scene is a deceased as well. You know what I mean? So again, we deem that to be an actual scene, and again the priorities around that at that time. Moving Mr. Bio from the hospital to the mortuary as such, and how we would do that and transfer. So again, it's pretty detailed, but it's almost putting your foot in the ball, as I say, and just taking a step back and looking at the priorities and to ensure that you do not lose anything evidentially. And as I say, that's the whole purpose of the forensic strategy briefing document meeting that occurs, and that will only be the first of usually many forensic strategy meetings as you progress through an investigation, depending on the complexities within a scene.
When was the forensic strategy document prepared? Was it in advance of this meeting?
Yes, it was. So yeah, that was, and it was presented at that meeting, yeah.
And who prepared that document?
So that was DCI Stuart Houston.
And what was his role that day?
So Stuart Houston was also on call that particular day. He was covering the Edinburgh City area, and I knew Stuart, and I contacted Stuart to come over to Kirkcaldy to manage a particular aspect of the investigation, which was round about the multiple scenes that we had identified. So almost to oversee strategically and coordinate the 5 scenes that we had at that particular time. So again, what we would normally do if we have one scene, it would simply be a crime scene manager we would deploy who would manage the scene, but because of the complexities of this incident, there was 5 scenes as such. So again, what I was wanting someone to have an oversight of the various scenes to ensure that everything was done as I was wanting it done as such, if that makes sense. But it's quite an unusual posting. We have done it on a number of occasions to have a coordinator when there are multiple scenes, and that was my reason for bringing Stuart over to deal with that.
So we may have heard reference to him as crime scene coordinator. Would that be a fair description of his job?
Yes.
And we may also have heard a description of him as deputy SIO. Would you agree with that description?
He was probably the next senior in command to myself. Leslie Bow was obviously there just to provide support as Detective Chief Super. But for the investigation side, Stuart was the next ranked specific officer was as DCI. Because of the aspect that we knew this was moving to PIRC, the appointment of a deputy SIO wasn't really necessary at that particular stage. We knew within 24 or 36 hours we were going to hand it over to PIRC to manage and take on the investigation and lead on the investigation. So although Stuart was there as a confidant, as someone to support me as SIO, the appointment of him as deputy SIO, I think potentially on paper, but in theory it just didn't happen. We didn't have the investigation, we didn't manage the investigation long enough, to be honest with you.
So crime scene coordinator is maybe a more accurate
Yes,
description
absolutely.
for that day. And you've talked about PIRC leading the investigation within 24 to 36 hours. Was that the timescale you envisaged on the 3rd of May?
It's difficult to say because I had never actually been involved in a lifetime response to a critical incident such as this with PIRC. The timescales round about the notification of PIRC to lead on it, I got from our PSD, our professional standards rep, Superintendent Craig Blackhall, at 09:35 hours on the 3rd, and the notification at that time was that from David Green at the Fatalities Unit at Crown Office that this would be a PIRC-led investigation supported by Police Scotland. So at 9:35 I was aware of that, but it wasn't until around about 10:20 or 10:22 hours that Keith Harrower, the DSI from PIRC, made contact with me, and we agreed various priorities at that particular stage. So I think in the answer to your question, I wasn't really aware how long I would manage it as SIO at that particular time. I think I anticipated it certainly would be until the minimum arrival of PIRC.
Right. So there was uncertainty about that
Yeah.
handover for you. And did that uncertainty exist for others as well, as far as you're aware?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was new business to Police Scotland at the time. I had been involved with PIRC mainly over telephone calls and direction for deaths following police contact previously, but it was mainly around about they were looking for they were given direction remotely almost. This was the first time that I had ever actually been physically deployed alongside PIRC to manage such a critical incident.
And you said the first contact you had with PIRC was about 10:25, did you say?
10:22 I think it was.
22.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Keith Harrower.
Yes.
And do you know Keith Harrower's background?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Keith was an officer with Strathclyde Police. So
Had you known him?
I had known him. I hadn't worked with Keith. Keith was mainly, I think he was in the Serious Crime Squad, and thereafter he was in the intelligence arena. Our paths crossed during various roles I had within headquarters at Pitt Street in Glasgow with Strathclyde at the time, but I had never actually worked with him as such, but as I say, our paths crossed during various meetings or forums that we were at together.
Do you know what rank he'd held when he was in the police?
I think he was Detective Chief Inspector, but I'm not sure. I think that's what he maybe concluded his inquiry at.
Do you know what experience he had in dealing with sudden deaths, deaths after police contact, or in police custody?
No, I don't.
We'll no doubt hear more about this.
Yeah.
Did you share with Colin Robson that this was going to be a PIRC-led inquiry?
I did, yes.
We've heard that you'd had a number of calls with Colin Robson during that day.
Yes.
I think in your inquiry statement, paragraph 374, but I don't need to have that on the screen, you describe yourself as the owner of the forensic strategy, and you actioned the development of the forensic strategy. So how was you've told us it was written by DCI Houston, but how was the strategy, how did it evolve?
So it evolved during the course of that morning through consultation and discussion I had with DSI Keith Harrower remotely as he was pulling together PIRT resources and attending at Kirkcaldy office. So there was a number of conversations around some of the forensic priorities with myself and Keith during the course of the morning. PIRT arrived around about 13:35 hours that day, and I went into initial briefing with Keith and PIRT representatives as well as some of my team, probably around about 13:45, 1400 hours that day before the second go group, where we discussed in more detail around some of the priorities that we had. In addition to that, DCI Stuart Houston had a separate forum within that hour, 2 hour period with representatives from PIRC to identify the forensic priorities as well. So that was delegated to Stuart to manage and look at that. And thereafter Stuart began to develop the document roundabout which you see in front of you. And myself and Stuart had a meeting to discuss the document. Was it suitable? Was there anything else we should put within the document? Which thereafter led it to be presented at the forensic strategy meeting, where again through discussion with Keith and the PIRT representatives, we obviously discussed whether or not there was anything else we had to put in it or take out, or whether any other priorities we had to look at around it. So again, that's exactly the kind of process that we had, and at the conclusion of the forensic strategy meeting, we were both happy from a Police Scotland side, as myself as SIO, as well as from Keith as the lead PIRC investigator.
So you effectively, as I understand it, provided strategic direction. I think this is what you say at 379 of your inquiry statement. Strategic direction about the relevant loci sits with me as SIO.
Yes.
Is that a fair
Yeah.
summary? Now, you've mentioned a number of timings very precisely. Are they from your daybook?
Some of them are, and some of them are from statements.
Right. So you've refreshed your memory on the statements and the
Yes.
daybook. Do you have in your daybook the time that PIRC arrived at Kirkcaldy? And I think if we go back to your daybook, that's PS 18269. And if we move down the page, I have it as page 5, but that's it. Thank you. Is that page 4 PDF? Yeah, thank you. And then over on to the next page. Do you see anything on either of those pages, or the next page that helps you identify when PIRC arrived?
No, but I know they arrived at 1:30 or thereabouts. It was 1:30 or 25 to 2. I'm clear in my mind around that.
All right. I'll have your statements checked.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, a moment ago when we were looking at the forensic document, the forensic strategy document, you described to us about what would happen if you were dealing with a murder. And you talked about getting the experts in to that forensic strategy meeting. You talked about a fiscal, you talked about maybe pathologists, maybe forensic experts. Now, if we look again at the minutes at the back of the forensic strategy document, PS 01298, then I just want you to look at who was present. That's the agenda, sorry, the minutes at the back. Thank you, just there. I don't see the name of a procurator fiscal there.
Yeah, I mean, they won't. A procurator fiscal will not attend all forensic strategy meetings. I mean, as I say, it depends on the circumstances. For homicide, they generally will attend all. But for other significant incidents, it's really up to themselves if they want to attend that.
Right. Was a fiscal invited to attend that meeting?
I'm not sure, it was Dave Green, it was the on-call Procurator Fiscal for fatalities. I'd spoke to Dave a couple of times during the course of the day around various aspects of the investigation, but I'm not sure if, I know Stuart had spoke to SP Forensic Services, and Stuart probably will be able to explain that better, but he'd spoke to a number of individuals. I see we've got one of the senior examiners, Gordon Young, at the forum, but I'm not sure if I think there was notification for the COPFS rep to attend the Gold Group, but again I don't think that occurred either, as far as I'm aware, during the time I was involved in the investigation. But it's not on every occasion that a Procurator Fiscal will attend.
We'll come on to the Gold Group meetings soon. So, when it says senior examiner, is Gordon Young what you would call a forensic expert?
Yeah, senior examiner, yeah, he is. I think I've put it down as senior examiner, but he's from SP Forensic Services, yeah.
Thank you. Lovely. Let's move on to the 3rd of May. Now, it may be that you'll wish to have your day book in front of you for this. I'd like to ask you about your connection with Colin Robson, because we'd like to understand who was SIO. And we've heard from Colin Robson that he was the on-call duty SIO for Fife Division. You've already said that yourself. And we understand that you were appointed SIO. And we were trying to understand who was the SIO at the time.
Yeah.
Now, we've heard from Colin Robson that he attended Hayfield Road when he was listening to the airwaves. He attended the first time. He described as simply, effectively, as a reinforcement to assist his colleagues. He took an officer to Victoria Hospital, realised things were progressing at Hayfield Road, then returned to Hayfield Road as duty on-call SIO. And his evidence was that at that second visit, he had his duty SIO hat on, if you like. I'm summarising. I think he said, I had the SIO thinking cap on in terms of the needs and priorities of the investigation on that on that return. And then we've obviously heard from him and from you that you both had a conversation. Mm-hmm. You'd been appointed SIO by Leslie Bole. And we're trying to understand, as I see, who is SIO?
Yeah, there can be only one SIO.
Right.
I mean, there is only one SIO. I mean, and I was appointed SIO, so from 8:30 onwards, there was only one SIO. I think that there's potentially a bit of confusion with some of the legacy postings of individuals, and what I mean by that is that the on-call detective inspector within a particular divisional area. So in Legacy Strathclyde, the on-call detective inspector wouldn't be named or deemed to be the on-call SIO. It would simply be the on-call detective inspector covering the particular area. To be an SIO, you really have to have an incident to lead on. So it's almost, in Fife, there's a generalisation that he's the on-call SIO for absolutely everything that occurs over that particular period he's on call, which again probably brings a bit of confusion to that. But it's very clear there is only one SIO, and there can only be one SIO. Not if you have multiple SIOs, it just totally blurs the lines and confuses things. So on my appointment as SIO, Colin was managing aspects of the response and of by Police Scotland at that time on my behalf through the consultation that we were having. and he may have seen himself as the initial SIO because he was physically there at that particular stage, but from 8:30 onwards, it's very clear in my mind, through Leslie Ball, through ACC Nicholson, that there was only one SIO because of the extent of the investigation that was going to be required around this. This wasn't going to be something that was going to be resolved in a number of hours. We knew that the consequences of this was going to basically carry on for days and weeks ahead.
So your appointment as SIO came from Nicholson and Bowles
Yes.
directly on a call.
Yes.
And so in terms of, if I can call it the official SIO, that was you.
Yes.
You were providing that strategic
Yes.
direction. And if we've heard from Colin Robson that it was his understanding that he was SIO, then you've talked about an initial SIO. Do you think he's wrong to say that he was SIO, or would you accept that he was an initial SIO?
Yeah, no, I mean, he was leading on the initial response of that incident from a CID perspective as such. For me, it would be too early to appoint him as an initial SIO. No, I mean, it would simply be as the on-call lead for crime for that particular area. He was leading on the response to it. Within 40 minutes or an hour after the incident, I mean, I was appointed SIO as such, so I'm not sure how significant it is, to be honest with you. It seems more a kind of a plain words that Colin deemed himself to be the initial SIO. I would seem to more that he is the initial lead officer responding within that territorial area to quite a significant incident, but with the machinery sitting in the background round about ACC Nicholson, Leslie Ball and myself, I mean, it was clear that there was going to be a requirement for a greater strategic governance around how we were going to respond to such an incident.
And so if we've heard from Colin Robson that it was his impression that he was SIO, and then at the first Gold Group meeting at 11:30, I mean, you may have listened to Colin Robson's evidence. He talked about that was the point of handover. So he provided the update at the first Gold Group meeting, and then there was this handover to you from round about 11:30. And I took that from him on the 1st of March. You obviously have listened to that. So again, do you feel that's accurate, or do you think that's inaccurate?
No, I mean, I'd ask the question who appointed him as SIO, because there was no appointment of SIO. So, as I say, I think that I take it his response was simply the lead officer in respect of the response to this incident. There was only one SIO appointed for this, and that was myself.
And is it necessary for someone to be officially appointed SIO in order to take on that role?
Yeah, I would say you are appointed as SIO to lead on the investigation by a senior officer.
Is that the normal
That's the normal
practice?
And I mean, there was so much going on in the background that Colin was unaware of, such as my liaison with PIRC, with PSD, into Crown Office, into Leslie Ball, back into ACC Nicholson, which was all ongoing from 8:30 to arrived at 9:15 or 9:20 with at Kirkcaldy office. So all that aspect of SIO lead into, such as phone calls to Craig Blackhall round about, this is the circumstances, can you link in with on-call Crown Office fatalities unit round about where this investigation may sit if Mr Bio succumbs. So all this is ongoing in the background that Colin's probably unaware of, and sitting with myself as SIO to lead on that strategically.
And is that the type of information the SIO would normally be involved in?
Yes, it'd be that high level strategic oversight of, okay, we've got what we have at Kirkcaldy, but the machinery sitting in the background, how do we thereafter notify the relevant agencies around that, was also a priority at that stage, obviously with the circumstances, the whole aspect of the statutory notification of a potential death or a serious injury following police contact into Crown Office Fatalities Unit, and thereafter that link from fatalities into PIRC on call, and thereafter that decision making round about where the investigation is going to sit at that time was all taking place probably without, he'd done it with the best of intentions, but but I don't think he realised the potential consequences of what we were actually dealing with at the time.
I think he did give evidence about his own views on
Yeah.
the recovery of the knife. And is that views that you share? You have
Absolutely.
concerns about
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
And to be specific, what are your concerns about the way the knife was recovered from the scene?
It doesn't lead to the best forensic capture that we could have had at that time.
What do you mean by that?
So, if you're looking for the optimum forensic capability of capture from that knife, round about fingerprints, DNA, you would have left that in situ. You would have got it covered even with a bucket or whatever else, just to leave it in situ at that particular stage. We would thereafter have photographed it, videoed it, 360 camera around that whole locality, and we could have thereafter done measurements round about from where the incident occurred to where the knife was, and so on and so forth. The best evidence as such around that. So again, no, I can see why he done it. He done it with the best of intentions, but regarding the best practice, it's probably not been adhered to in respect to that.
And when you talk about all the things that could have been done, would that have been done by forensic scientists or experts?
Yeah, we would have deployed a crime scene manager, and again we would have taken the various specialists with us to the scene and done what we had to do around that, round about measurements, round about 360 cameras, round about what's the best aspect of securing the knife, seizing the knife, to allow either fingerprints or DNA to be obtained at that level as such. So again, that's a normal consequence of any investigation at that particular level we would deal with. I mean, we would generally leave the scene as it was when we turned up, other than beginning to remove things from it at that point, which thereafter brings with it complications later on as you begin to basically investigate.
You've also mentioned the involvement of PSD, the Professional
Yes.
Standards Department. Can you explain a little about why they get involved?
Yeah, so the on-call PSD, who was Craig Blackwell at the time, is really the gateway into Crown Office Fatalities Unit and ultimately into PIRC. So I wouldn't naturally contact Fatalities Unit on my own. I was usually, particularly for a death or serious injury following police contact, the normal gateway is through the on-call PSD, Professional Standards Rep, who would thereafter make that phone call around that, which is really beneficial, because as an SIO you've got so many, you're spinning so many plates at that particular time. So for Craig to take that away and say, look, I've made Dave Green from Crown Office aware of it, I'm waiting on coming back to me, leave it with me just now, and as soon as Dave Green comes back I'll give you a call back around that, and Craig did. So again, it's just that's the natural route in respect of protocol or procedure into PIRC.
So that relieves you of the responsibility of making contact.
Yes.
With, and we're hoping to hear from Mr. Green
Yeah.
In the future. So that side of things, however, was dealt with by Craig Blackwell.
It was.
Have you having contacted him to do that?
Yes.
Thank you. And apart from the recovery of the knife, during the period that Colin Robson was, from the time he was at the scene and up till 11:30 at the first school group meeting, did you have any other concerns from having listened to his evidence about things that he was dealing with?
No, I arrived quite quickly at Kirkcaldy. I arrived about 9:15 that morning, and I went into an initial meeting with Colin round about, must have been about 10 o'clock that morning, and again, I think I've detailed it in my day book, but
Do you want to
Yeah.
refer to that?
so
We can go back to your day book and we can have that on the screen as well.
Yeah.
So that's PS 18269. And if we go down to about page 4,
So
Thank you.
maybe just a bit of the background around this. So basically, when I arrive, it's I'm contacted by Colin Robson around 9-10 hours, who Colin explains to me that Mr. Bio is unfortunately has passed away. So that's the first notification I get at that time, and I say to Colin, look, I'm really nearby just now, and I wasn't sure how to get into the office, so I said, could Colin meet me in the backyard of the car park? So I arrived around about 9:15, 9:20, and prior to getting into the office I made contact with Leslie Ball and Craig Blackhall to inform them of the unfortunate death. So at that time I went into the office and initially met with Gary McEwen. Gary made his way to Kirkcaldy, and Gary had explained to me that he'd identified it as a critical incident at that stage, and that thereafter led me to move to an adjacent room with Colin, and we began to identify the priority actions at that particular stage around it. So what I did ask Colin to do was to pull or examine the Storm system, which is our incident management system, and to basically get copies of all the incidents that basically referred to Hayfield Road or nearby around that. And so what I've got on my day book, as you see in there, is around about the initial priorities.
So we see at the top you've got a time there, 09:10.
Yeah, so
we
that's
actually see in your policy file.
Yeah.
I'll just refer you to these very briefly, and we'll come back to this page
Okay.
in the day book. But if you look at the management policy file, page 4, decision 4. So this is PS 17854. And if we go into page 61454, decision number 4, you'll see there, I think, you've written in, informed by DI Colin Robson. I'm not sure what ref deceased.
I referenced the deceased now PLE'd at 0904 hours.
Right. So that was you being informed by Colin
Yeah.
Robson that Mr. Bio had passed
Yeah.
away. And then on the next page, I think, which is 55, decision 6, you see brief, is it?
Briefing to Divisional Commander P Division Gary McEwen, Chief Super, 0910 hours, critical incident called.
Right. Actually, I'm just looking at this now, and I see that decision number 5 is, I don't see that in my copy. Do we have decision number 5? It goes from 4 to 6. Can you, on your copy, you'll have the same copy
I've got the
as
same copy
I
as
do
you, yeah.
Actually. We'll maybe see if we can check
Yeah,
the original
check that. It's
on
maybe
that
just
one.
it's maybe just the numbering I've done on it.
Could be.
Yeah.
Could be. Right. So you got a call from Colin Robson to tell you that Mr. Bio's died.
Yes.
You then you find out that Gary McEwen has declared a critical incident. That's at 9:10.
Mm-hmm.
And you go into Kirkcaldy Police Office, and the first thing you do is start calling up the call cards, or the
Yes.
storm cards,
Yes.
to see what the messages were,
Yes.
the calls prior to. And is that you familiarising yourself with the information in the call card?
Yes.
And you mentioned priority actions. Is that the point at which you start thinking about those?
So basically, yeah, on the I don't know if you.
Will we go back to
my
the
day
day
book?
book?
Yeah.
Let's do that. And so that's PS 18269. And if we can go back to page 4, I think it is.
Yeah. So again, while I'm sitting with Colin, I'm detailing some of the priority areas that I'm looking at. So you'll see down at the left-hand side there, I've got deceased locus.
So is this under a box that appears to maybe say priorities?
It does,
cross?
priorities, and then there's XX next to it, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I've got deceased locus. I'm not sure exactly what that says after that. but below that again is unidentified male who is associate of deceased injured, so that's referring to Mr. Saeed.
Right.
And question mark around a bit, is he injured or what's occurred around that? Custody van, CCTV coverage, urgent.
We could move up, please.
House to house,
Is that H2H?
yeah, coordination, paperwork around it. So begin to start to think about, let's review the parameters that we're looking to put in place. And then below that I've got operational statements, 7 times officers involved, and thereafter intelligence priorities of this intelligence and intelligence profiles of deceased and Zaid at that stage.
Only of those two at that moment?
Yeah, it was so early on at that particular stage. That's what the priorities that we were looking at. So that's, I'm always kind of mind mapping exactly, putting down exactly what I'm looking to get done with the resources that we have available at that time.
Where had you heard about Zaid Sahid?
I'm not sure. I don't know if it came from at that time. I think we were aware, or I was aware, Colin had briefed me around about Colette Bell's call at that time. So I have a feeling it came from the call card from Colette Bell.
So we've heard about a call that Colette Bell had made to the police at 8:36 in the morning,
Yes.
Regarding her partner not being at home and her house. And I think she'd mentioned his friend had contacted her, that's
Yes.
why she'd returned home.
Yes.
And he was Zaid Sahid.
Yes.
So could that be how you knew about that?
I think it is, and then when you look at the opposite page, I mean, I've got the call cards I've got are detailed on the opposite page there, and one of them is Aaron Crescent Kirkcaldy, which is Colette Bell's name across from it, so that's one of the call cards we've got, and Colin's got in front of him at that particular time.
Right, we'll look at the facing page. If we can move to the top of that, please. So it says at the top there, is that ID Shekubio? Or does that say IP?
Sorry, where about,
The
sorry?
next page.
Yes,
sorry, have you
sorry,
finished the...
Yeah. So that was the only point I was going to make. I've noted up the top of the first page there that the Federation rep has been called out, Amanda Given. And Amanda Given comes into the room with myself and Colin Robson around about 10 o'clock or thereabouts, and she introduces herself.
Right, where do you see that in the data?
See the very top line of the...
Top on the left-hand
yeah,
side?
left-hand side.
And you say that was about 10 o'clock?
I think it was...
And ask about this concept of a gold group, but I'm conscious it's 11:30.
We'll take a break then for 20 minutes. Yes, Ms. Graham.
Thank you. Detective Superintendent, Detective Chief Superintendent, before we broke for a short break, I was about to come on to ask you about the Gold group meeting.
Yes.
In the sense of, could you explain what this Gold group is and explain the structure of Gold, Silver and Bronze for us, please?
Yeah, no problem. So it's something familiar to policing in the UK. It's a strategic governance structure for how we manage critical major incidents. It ensures that there is governance, oversight and accountability around not just the investigation but other aspects that are pertinent to the inquiry or the investigation, such as community impact, media, community reassurance, equality, diversity, and various other strands that may be particular to the incident you're responding to. Again, you may have Crown within that Gold group structure. And again, it really depends on the nature of what you're responding to. You may have partners involved in it as well. So Gold, the Gold commander as such has that oversight of not just what I had was the investigation, but has all the different other pillars that are impacting on the response to the investigation. So a really significant role. And down from that you have Silver, who supports Gold and the command structure that he has or she has put in place, and would normally run an adjacent or parallel group round about some of the other aspects that maybe Gold has asked him or her to take on as such. And under that there are a number of bronze leads or bronze commanders, depending on what you call them as such. But for example, you would have bronze investigation. So bronze investigation for this incident was myself, and thereafter you would have bronze media, bronze community impact, bronze EDI, equality, diversity, inclusion, bronze community reassurance, bronze community impact, bronze resources, bronze finance, various other bronze leads, who would thereafter feed through at the overarching Gold group meeting, round about any feeds that they want to present into the Gold commander. So for myself as bronze, I would have a separate briefing, a separate group which basically would encompass the investigation. So for example, if it was a homicide, I keep going back to homicide, but that's probably the best example. I would have a briefing in the morning and close of play every day, and thereafter I would also attend the Gold group and give the highlights of the investigation as it progresses over that period as such. Really kind of high level strategic actions that I've carried out over that period to inform the Gold round about how it's progressing as such, and if there's any issues that I would want to share with a wider group, which, as I say, encompasses the various strands that are impacted on any investigation. So it ensures that there is that accountability governance around what we're dealing with, and I mean this is a really good example. I mean that there is more to the investigation into Mr. Bio than simply the investigation side of things. That is only one significant strand, but there's so many others that the Gold commander, who was ACC Nicholson at the time, obviously he is looking for information on a regular basis of how that's progressing, so he can thereafter inform the Force Executive regarding the progress of the investigation and round about the aspect of critical incident and eventually how we can return to some sort of normality, and that's really the Gold structure, how we can thereafter move through the various phases of the inquiry to return to some sort of business as normal. I think that's probably the best way I can describe it.
Was this Gold command structure set up after it was declared a critical incident or before?
I think it was after, yeah. So it was declared at 0910 by by Gary McEwen, the Chief Super, who was the on-call for that part of the country at the time. So the meeting for the executive meeting at that time was at 9:30. So ACC Nicholson would have chaired a kind of strategic meeting, which is a daily meeting at the weekends that the ACC on-call will chair with senior representatives from crime, from operational support, from various parts of the country to provide an overview of what's happening in Scotland in respect of criminal matters and other aspects of public reassurance, community impact, even events that are ongoing as such. So these would all feed into that executive meeting and a morning over a weekend, whereby the ACC would thereafter, on taking that information in, would thereafter make that further phone call to the on-call the on-call Deputy Chief Constable, who would be on call for the force at that weekend as such. So again, that's how that would work.
And on the 3rd of May, Gold Command, you've said, was ACC Nicholson?
Yes.
And there's one silver, he was Gary McEwen?
Gary McEwen, yeah.
And there are multiple bronze?
Yes.
And one of those was yourself?
Yes.
As SIO of the investigation part?
Yes, so bronze investigation lead.
Is that what it's called?
Yes.
Bronze. So you were SIO, bronze investigation, and we've also heard that you were maybe an IIO, initial investigating. And is that a phrase used from the post-incident procedures SOP?
Exactly.
Right. That's 3 separate titles, but effectively was it one job?
It's one job, yeah.
And we've talked about Colin Robson. You've explained his role that day. Was he aware or made aware of his place in this structure and his place in the investigation team?
Yeah, so the response to an unexplained death in general is you automatically move through experience into the mode of this is what we do. So I think I'm trying to explain that the fact is that you don't actually have to really tell people or inform people exactly what the actions are around it. No, I mean, we would normally, as we did that particular day, you almost go into that investigative mode round about we're responding to an unexplained death at that particular time. So the areas I've got down as priorities are almost a standard lift from any death investigation I've been involved in over the last 25 years. And you simply would just move into that automatic mode around that. Colin was there to support me in the investigation and round about some of the priority actions around that. So, and I've known Colin for a period of time, so there's been various other deaths in Kirkcaldy and the surrounding area within Fife that I've responded to as on call, where Colin has been on call as well at that particular stage. So we had a relationship, we knew exactly, I mean, what was required and the standard of investigation and so on and so forth. So it wasn't anything new. It wasn't anything I would have to sit down and say to Colin, well, you know your role here. I mean, this almost became automatic. The fact is that we knew how we would respond, and the great majority of the CID personnel that are involved in these investigations are very experienced, and they know that if they're asked to go in detail an action or take on some sort of activity in respect of a direction I've given, I mean, you don't physically have to sit down and say, well, this is what I want you to do, I want you to go to the door, I want you to bring them into the office, I want you to know a statement from them. They generally know that. I mean, as I say, if we say, well, we're looking for a statement for Pat Campbell, so they'll know, they'll go out, they'll get Pat Campbell, they'll get a statement from him, and they'll come back in and feed back into an investigation.
On the morning of the 3rd of May, you've described about your arrival at Kirkcaldy at roughly 9:15.
Yeah.
We've heard about Colin Robson returning, the officers returning. We've heard evidence from DS Dursley. and various other officers who were involved that day. Was there a point at that sort of time in the morning, after 9:15, when you arrived, where you had a sort of introductory discussion or briefing with officers to introduce yourself, explain what was going to happen?
No. So it was too fast moving to allow that to happen. There was priority actions already being in progress. For example, Colette Bell was already within the office at round about that time. We knew the significance of Colette Bell's call into the control room, round about the concern for call and the nature of it. So with the limited resources I had at that particular time, we were still waiting on resources coming from the surrounding divisions into Kirkcaldy. In a great number of occasions when you're running with major investigations or incidents that are live time, you generally wouldn't have a briefing immediately. You would that sometimes in the manuals they call it this golden hour, whereby you basically try to look at what you have in front of you and try to manage that and deal with it and get the evidence or the intelligence and information that potentially would point your investigation in a particular manner through the various hypotheses you maybe have in front of you.
Let's explore the hypotheses that you've mentioned. Explain to us what you mean when you talk about hypotheses.
Well, at the start of any investigation, you keep an open mind at all times around the potential reasons why someone may have died. So, again, it's crucial for that transparency and accountability that you have that open mind around it. So, I can recall even driving through to Kirkcaldy. I had about 4 or 5 different hypotheses that were running through my mind in respect of what may have occurred.
Tell us what they were.
So, obviously, I was aware that there had been restraint by the police officers. So, again, one of the aspects is, did Mr. Bayo die as a result of restraint? Did Mr. Bayo die as a result of an earlier assault, which subsequently led him to Hayfield Road? Did Mr. Bayo die as a result of some sort of medical condition that we hadn't identified at that time? Did Mr. Bayo die as a result of drink, drugs, intoxication, overdose? And thereafter, probably the 5th one, which at that time was round about, was there some aspect of counter-terrorism, CT, ideology aspect to what we were looking at that particular time, although there was no intelligence indicating anything as such. But again, I think what I'm trying to entail is you keep an open mind round about what you're dealing with and you don't go down one particular road.
And explain to us, once you've identified these different hypotheses, what do you do in relation to each of those?
Well, through the course of the investigation, you begin to actually identify or eliminate that the potential aspect is one of these. So again, you begin to cross them out almost and put the rationale behind why you actually are now moving towards that more than this other one as such. So again, as the investigation progressed that morning, we were aware of the calls, for example, as the morning, afternoon progressed around about Arn Crescent, about the relevance to the altercation with Mr. Bayo and Mr. Said. We obviously had the calls from the 3 members of the public at Hayfield Road about Mr. Bayo acting erratically in possession of a knife, and we thereafter had the coming together on Hayfield Road with the police officers in the restraint. So again, it became quite clear over the course of morning, early afternoon, that this was the circumstances or the sequence of events that we were going to prioritise. Now again, the hypothesis around about restraint, drink, drugs, intoxication, medical condition, they're all still very much in your mind, and you're working through each of them as such, round about background checks you're getting done, round about intelligence. Is there anything at all indicating there is anything, as I say, round about ideology or CT related, which we were able to eliminate very, very quickly around that aspect of it. So thereafter you're moving through your various other hypotheses at all times, keeping an open mind around that. But again, as the day progresses, as we begin to get the information into the incident room, it becomes clearer exactly what we are dealing with at that particular time.
And just so that people are completely clear about what you're saying, we've heard reference to CT as counter-terrorism.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Have you noted down your hypotheses in your daybook or your policy file? Is there somewhere else that you note those down?
No, I think it's just about keeping an open mind around it. And as I say, I've always approached any incident with that. I mean, around about the fact that you detail, or you don't focus on a particular area. I mean, the fact is that the information coming to me at that time was simply around about this occurred due to restraint. But again, as I say, what I'm looking at is the wider aspect of the other potential consequences of why this has happened.
How do you, when you're considering your hypotheses, you've explained what the 5 were, how do you work out how to exclude them or eliminate them from your working hypotheses?
Through information, intelligence, evidence that we obtained during the course of the investigation, you begin to be able to eliminate the various hypotheses that you have developed.
When do you decide that you have sufficiently investigated a hypothesis and you're comfortable with eliminating it?
So it's probably difficult to say. It's really when you believe that you have sufficient information, intelligence that points you in a different direction. So the aspect of the incident on the 3rd of May, the hypotheses ran about restraint, alcohol, drug intoxication, medical condition, they were all still very, very relevant because it was really difficult to eliminate any of them at that particular time. So again, they continued the hypothesis around that. The CT aspect we could eliminate pretty quickly around any ideology aspect of this was the motivation around it. So again, that was we could eliminate that through some of the background checks we could do across the network of policing in the UK. But again, there was a number of hypotheses that were left open and continued to be left open as I handed the investigation over because of the absence of operational statements, for example, the result of the post-mortem examination, pending toxicology. So again, there was a number of hypotheses that I could not basically conclude or eliminate as I handed the investigation over.
So you've mentioned counter-terrorism and how it was eliminated quite quickly. Mm-hmm. How was it that you were able to eliminate that?
Well, there was no information or intelligence indicating that there was any motivational aspect that this was some sort of CT-related attack. The climate in 2015 was very different than it is now, particularly within policing, whereby the threat level to police was severe. We had various guidance put out internally around keep safe, around about travelling to work. We had CT-related incidents across Europe in the preceding months to this. So again, that aspect was very much in the minds of officers as well. I mean, it was about like, don't travel to work in your uniform, don't be deployed in a single man car, make sure or a single person car, make sure that it's double crewed cars that are out at that particular time. So again, it was a different environment that we find, or a landscape that we find ourselves in just now. But to answer your question, there was nothing, no intelligence at all that we could see identifying or linking any CT-related aspect to this incident. And again, what we would do is, as I say, it's not just internally within Police Scotland. We have obviously other law enforcement partners across the UK that we can link into their network as such to basically to see if there is anything at all that we should be concerned of or we should be considering at that particular time.
What checks did you have or instruct to carry out in relation to counter-terrorism?
Yeah, so it was really to link into the wider UK policing network, particularly CT side, the counter-terrorism side, to see if there was anything at all that would indicate that there was any aspect of terrorism or terror-related motivation around this. And as I say, we could quite clearly eliminate that there wasn't.
And in terms of considering counter-terrorism as one of the hypotheses, was there anything that caused you to consider that in the first place, from the circumstances that
I think it was really the circumstances of the incident. What we had was a male with a knife, 6 o'clock in the morning, in a relatively quiet town, Kirkcaldy, acting erratically. So again, that wasn't the initial focus. That was just one of the hypotheses, as I say, just to keep it extremely open and transparent, that we were looking at absolutely everything that we could basically consider to ensure that there was rationale, there was accountability around that, my decision making around that. So as I say, it was only one aspect of it, but with the necessary checks that we carried out through our intelligence side, we could quite clearly identify that there was no aspect of terror-related motivation around us.
We've heard evidence from other officers that knife incidents and calls about knife incidents were very common at that time in 2015. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we heard some evidence that multiple calls about knife incidents would be made on a shift basis for officers. What was it in particular that turned this incident into one where you considered counter-terrorism as a hypothesis?
So again, I think it was just the circumstances that, as I was running through what I was dealing with and my wider considerations around that, and I think it was raised at the Gold Group as well by ACC Nicholson, was an unusual type incident at that time in the morning for and again, this came independently from the 3 particular members of the public who witnessed this. So again, this wasn't coming from a single source. This was coming from multiple sources round about the erratic behaviour of an individual in a town at that time in the morning, which you potentially find, my experience is knife crime, knife-related incidents usually occur all times of the day and night, but predominantly it's kind of afternoon, early evening type thing, or within a domestic setting or within a dwelling house as such. No, I mean, it's, you don't very much, I don't think I've ever seen a similar incident to this in 27 years of that time in the morning of a male acting as such. So again, this wasn't a single focus, to reassure you. This was just one strand of multiple hypotheses that I was looking at.
I'm interested in the particular circumstances that caused you to consider counter-terrorism. So you've said it was raised by Nicholson at the Gold Group meeting, but you're describing in the car travelling to Kirkcaldy in the morning, thinking about the possible hypotheses.
Yes.
This was long before the Gold Group meeting. And you've talked about the particular timing on a Sunday morning. You've talked about the number of calls you'd received from members of the public into the police. Were there any other factors or circumstances which caused you to consider the possibility of counter-terrorism?
As I said before, I think it was also the climate within the UK at that time in 2015. And it was to appreciate there was a threat to policing in the UK. The threat level was, as I say, raised to severe, that an attack on law enforcement or police was highly likely. We had a number of force memos, memorandums. We had information passed from the force executive round about stay safe, round about take care, around responding to incidents and travelling to and from your workplace, round about the security of police offices, police stations, where you park your motor vehicle, how you interact off duty and things such as that. So I think it was a climate at the particular time within law enforcement and the threat to policing in general, and with a really unusual incident that made me consider that as an hypothesis. You know, I mean, to be honest with you, that was my main considerations.
Anything else that you can think of?
No.
You've not mentioned the fact that Mr. Bile was black. Was that one of the factors?
No, absolutely not. If it was a white male with a knife restrained by police officers, I would have still had the same. I would still have the same hypothesis around. Let's get the checks done around. Is it linked to any particular aspect of the terror network as such around that? So again, the Mr. Bile being black had no relevance at all to it.
So if it had been a white male involved in those circumstances,
yes,
would counter-terrorism checks have still been carried out?
Absolutely.
And who was it that you instructed or directed to carry out those counter-terrorism checks?
So that would be the intelligence cell that was established to manage that.
Is that a separate department, if you like, within the
Yeah,
service?
well, the intelligence cell is linked to the investigation. It's a structure basically that you would ask for the necessary background checks, wider network checks on particular individuals that are involved in or come into the incident as such. So they support the investigation.
We've heard from DS Dursley that checks were carried out. He invited checks to be done, or instructed, I should say, checks to be done by a member of staff in Kirkcaldy Police Office in relation to Mr. Bile himself and Colette Bell during the morning. That was just by a member of staff in Kirkcaldy Police Office. Is that separate from this intelligence cell that you're talking about?
I mean, we have a 24/7 capability based within Scottish Crime Campus in Garcosh that we can link in with around any further more in-depth checks or checks that we would want carried out in respect of anything. So again, there is that local aspect, but there's a wider aspect of that we have governance 24/7, 365 days a year, around the wider checks across the network within the UK, which links into other law enforcement partners, not just within Police Scotland as such.
So UK-wide?
Yeah.
And who was it you contacted in the intelligence cell to carry out these checks?
So that would have been through discussions with Colin Robson, with the initial stages of the investigation, asking for these checks to be carried out. And I think it came as an action from one of the goal groups to ensure that that had been done as well. And
do we see that noted in your daybook?
No, I don't think we do.
No. By the time you wrote the daybook, had you ruled out counter-terrorism as a hypothesis?
No, my daybook was written as I was basically going through the day as such.
Right. Is there anything in your policy file
I don't think
regarding
there is. No.
checks?
No.
So
it's a standard process. We would naturally, anyone who comes into an investigation such as this or any homicide or organised crime investigation, we would have an intelligence structure to support the investigation around about who is this particular individual, is there any particular threats, is there any information that we require as we progress the investigation around about officer safety as such, and anything else we need to know around it.
And that would be done through D.I. Robson?
Yeah, I think it was D.I. Robson or he'd allocated it, I think he'd allocated it to someone else to take on.
Right. Who did you have checks done on initially?
So I didn't particularly have any checks done on anyone initially. I delegated that through the team that was supporting me as such.
So, although you're providing strategic direction, and this is a working hypothesis, did you dictate who the checks would be carried
No.
out on? No. So, normally, in the normal course of events, would it be wider than just simply the deceased?
Yeah. Yeah.
Who would it encompass these checks?
So no, we would generally, in any investigation, any relevant particular person of interest that came into the investigation, we would do some checks on, or background checks on, to see if there is anything at all that we should be aware of as such.
What constitutes a person of interest?
I think anyone that comes into the investigation, round about a greater understanding of, when we are speaking to them, or we're engaging with them as such, that we're fully aware of the background. And again, it's really relevant to all investigations. We would have that more detailed intelligence structure sitting behind any investigation, supporting it with the necessary information just to provide you with a greater understanding of the particular individual you may be dealing with as such.
Would it include Zaid Saheed?
Yeah. I believe it encompassed the majority of people during the time I was involved in the investigation that came into it. We would do the necessary checks around that as such.
Would it include someone like Colette Bell, who was the partner of the deceased?
I'm not sure about Colette.
Martin Dick, a friend?
It may have, as I say, as SIO and strategic oversight of the investigation, the intelligence structure would generally look at all persons that have come into the inquiry, and look at if there is anything at all that we should be aware of. And again, that would just do through checks around about access to police systems that we have, around anything at all that, again, may inform the investigation as we move forward. But
it's a person of interest rather than just every name that comes to your attention in the investigation?
Yeah. No, it would be a person of interest, other than every single witness that crosses into an investigation.
And who decides who those persons of interest are?
So that would be really for the intelligence structure, the intelligence cell, to make that decision around it. Or the individual officer who has been allocated the action around to interview Pat Campbell. So again, they may want to look at the background of Pat Campbell before they go and speak to him. Round about, is there any warning signals? Is there background that we should be aware of? Is there a warrant live for him, as for example? Is there anything at all that there is intelligence held which indicates that we should be concerned around approaching Pat Campbell as such? So again, a lot of the individual officers getting the actions would carry out some background checks and through the intelligence structure to see if there is anything at all that they would have. And it's really to go to speak to someone with as much information as you possibly can at that particular time of any investigation.
So when we look at your daybook, there was a part on intel, wasn't there, that you mentioned earlier? Somewhere. If we can have that back on the screen, please. Sorry, it's PS 18269. And I think page 4, towards the bottom of that page, you made reference to one of the priorities being intel.
Yeah, and it's basically at that early stage, probably the two most relevant individuals are the deceased and Mr. Zaid. So I'd asked for intelligence profiles to be created around both of them at that point. And the justification around that was obviously to look at the background of Mr. Bayou, but also round about the fact we were unaware at that time of what involvement Mr. Zaid had within the incident. And I think I detail that just a couple of lines up. where it's unidentified male as associate of the deceased, is he injured? So again, that was reference to Mr Zaid at that time from the information we had from Colette Bell's call into the call centre.
That's item 4.
Yeah, so again, the relevance and of Mr. we were unaware of. So again, was there, and that goes back to the hypothesis, was the one of them was the fact was the deceased injured as a result of an earlier incident which thereafter took him to Hayfield Road. So and was the unidentified male, who we believe was Mr Zaid, had he been injured, because what we had the deceased a short time after this in possession of a knife. So again, you're keeping an open mind, you're unaware exactly how relevant Mr Zaid is to it. Was he a contributory factor to an earlier assault on the deceased, or was he simply a witness to this, or is he lying injured elsewhere within that particular area? So again, it's around that. I mean, who is Mr Zaid? Where does he live? How can we get hold of him? How can we contact him? And so on. So these things are all going round. So again, the profiles, the intelligence update round about both the deceased and Zaid were important at that time.
And then looking at the hypotheses, you mentioned about perhaps drink and drugs, intoxication of some sort.
Yeah.
Tell us how you prioritise steps, investigative strands in relation to that hypothesis.
So, and again, a lot of this came from Colette Bell, and from the information we were getting from Colette, we were aware that he'd obviously been at a family gathering, I believe on the 2nd of May, and there had been contact with Colette, I think about 11 o'clock that evening, where she thought he was, I can't remember her words in her statement around it, but he seemed to be a bit annoyed about something, and thereafter we were aware through Colette that he'd attended at the house of Martin Dick, and through the course of that morning, speaking to Martin Dick and his partner, it became clear again round about the aspect of Mr Bayou being out of character within Martin Dick's house, which they pointed out, and speaking to Mr Zaid, obviously he indicates that as well. He appeared to be under the influence of alcohol or some sort of drugs or substance, which was extremely out of character for him. The information we were getting, that Mr Zaid was indicating that he believed somebody had disrespected him within Martin Dick's house. So again, there was a wider aspect to the hypothesis around about alcohol, drink, drugs, intoxication, which may have been a contributory factor to his death. So again, that was one of the areas of obviously focus as well. So
that hypothesis, you were able to find information that perhaps supported that
yes.
hypothesis. Then you talked about a medical condition being one of the possible hypotheses. What actions or steps did you take in relation to that?
So that was more about the statement from Colette Bell round about, was there anything at all that, was he suffering from any illness? Did he have any injury? Was there anything at all that we should be aware of at this time? So again, for most unexplained death investigations, one of the standard hypotheses is there an underlying medical condition? And we're not going to find that out really until after the post-mortem examination. But we may have some sort of information from family, friends, that there has been some sort of either illness or medical condition that is in the background to this as such. So again, it was just one of the hypotheses I had.
So not something you can perhaps eliminate until after the post-mortem.
Yeah.
But was there anything that you were able to identify from information that day that indicated there was a medical condition?
Not that I can recall, no.
And then you talked about an earlier assault, and you've mentioned the situation with Zaid Saheed. So that continued to be a working hypothesis?
Yeah.
And was that, you've described how you were interested in Mr. Zahid, and was that something you wanted to take a statement from him?
Yeah, it was a priority action.
And then you've also mentioned restraint as being
Yeah.
a possible hypothesis. Tell us about that hypothesis.
The initial information that came to me from Leslie Bowl was that there was a restraint by the police on Mr. Bio. That was also emphasised by Colin Robson once I spoke to Colin Robson, and Colin had explained that Pava CS had been discharged and also there had been batting strikes. So again, just with that information, that was an obvious hypothesis that it was going to stay live.
And when you say stay live, what does that actually mean?
So it was one that I ran with through the course of the duration of when I was SIO and through the inquiry, that I was unable to eliminate at that time. That restraint was a potential contributory factor to the death of Mr. Bio.
So you were not able to eliminate that hypothesis?
No, in the absence of any operational statements or eyewitness accounts or anything at all during the early stages I had the investigation, I could not eliminate it.
And were those the main planks of how you would have gone about eliminating it if you'd received operational statements or eyewitness accounts?
It would significantly have assisted.
So in the meantime, that remained a live working hypothesis. Yeah. Were there any other avenues or priority actions that you sought to assist you in this hypothesis and moving forward with this hypothesis?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a number, but some of them are listed there as well, round about operational statements. I've noted that down at a very early stage. I mean, the requirement for them.
I think you read that out earlier.
Yeah, it's number, I think it's number second line for the bottom of the page.
Was that 8 operational statements?
Yeah, and even one above it, house to house. So house to house at Hayfield Road, is that going to identify witnesses to the restraint? Mm-hmm. The custody van, the potential CCTV within the van, which again, I said that's an urgent action. Let's get technical support unit out. There's a matter of urgency to basically download that, which we've greatly assisted as well. CCTV in general, the wider aspect of a CCTV trawl, is there anything at all around public-private space CCTV that we should prioritise that will give us a further indication exactly what occurred at Hayfield Road? So that there are various aspects of it. I mean, even into the media. I mean, could be doing an appeal for information or witness appeal around passing motorists, dash cam footage, and so on and so forth. So things such as that would have assisted that hypothesis and supported it as such.
You've perhaps watched some of the evidence where we've played different parts of CCTV, dash cam footage, mobile phone footage. Have you seen any of that? No. We understand from earlier evidence there was an issue with the CCTV in the van.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
It would have greatly assisted because of the position where the van was. If we had that footage there, it would have almost picked up the actual restraint and the incident with Mr. Bio. So again, I'd asked for the TSU to be called out. I think it was through Colin Robson and eventually Dursley, I think, to basically make that call around, it's a Sunday morning, but we couldn't wait to the Monday till they came back on, so I wanted them called out to basically examine, did we have that footage, that we could get that early insight into exactly what did occur there. So again, that was something it was considered and deemed a priority by myself.
And we've heard that the CCTV in the van wasn't working.
I don't think it had been working for some time, I gather. Yeah.
And then in relation to restraint, you've talked about this as a hypothesis and things that you were pursuing to consider that a hypothesis. Can I ask you, did you bear in mind that Mr. Bio was black? And did you consider at that time a number of very public inquiries down south about issues arising where black men in particular, where they're restrained by the police, may have a poor outcome, if I can call it that?
So the fact that Mr. Bio was black didn't really have any bearing on my direction at the time. If it was a white male that had been restrained and died, I would have still carried out the same actions around that. I was aware of a number of the incidents, investigations down south in particular regarding black males who have died following police contact or restraint. So I was aware of that. I was aware of some of the reviews that had been carried out around that. But again, regarding the actions that I developed and put in place at that time, there was no bearing in the fact that he was black. I would have carried the same actions out and managed it the same way if it was a white male.
So that knowledge or awareness didn't actually impact on the actions which you identified as requiring to be carried out?
No, I think, I mean, as any senior officer within Police Scotland, we were aware of these incidents down south in particular where restraint had been used or either excessive force or the manner of handcuffing or placing in cells or vehicles had eventually caused the death of the particular individual. So again, I was very aware of that, but as I say, the actions I carried out would have been carried out if it was a white male involved in this incident.
When you're talking about putting people in vehicles, are you thinking of positional asphyxia as a possibility?
Yeah.
So that's something else that you were considering?
Yeah, and I mean, I dealt with a death in custody whereby it was a male who was arrested in Edinburgh, had basically been placed into the rear of a police van, face down, handcuffed, heavily intoxicated, and on arrival at St Leonard's custody suite was unresponsive and subsequently died. So again, I was very much aware of positional asphyxia and knew about the implications around that.
And what was the cause of death in that particular situation?
So I'm not sure because I handed the investigation over. I was on call, unfortunately, and dealt with the initial stages of it.
And is that the case that although you're on call and maybe deal with the initial stages, you don't always find out what the outcome ultimately is?
I simply handed that over to a further SIO at that time.
Right. Is there any, I think I've asked you this, but is there any document in front of you where we can see the hypotheses that you identified and see how those progressed? Is there anything in your policy file or?
No, I don't think there is. I mean, it was something I would probably detail if I was maintaining it as SIO. I would thereafter begin to note down the hypotheses around it and how I've basically began to eliminate them and how they've been developed or I've been unable to eliminate them as such. But with the fact I really only had that for the best part of 36 hours, I didn't detail them down as such. But they were very much in, as any SIO would explain to you, I mean, that that's the initial stages of your thinking round about the development of a number of hypotheses of exactly what occurred, and it's that open-mindedness, it's about that transparency and accountability round about let's not eliminate anything at this particular time.
You talked earlier about the policy file containing high-level actions and decisions. Is the policy file generally where you would expect to note down hypotheses?
Yes.
Right. And you prepared this largely, I think you said, on the 4th and then handed it over on the 5th?
Correct. Yeah.
But is there anything in here at all that would assist the chair when he comes to consider this document that would even identify that you had identified hypotheses or anything along those lines?
No, I don't think there is around it. As I said, it was so fast moving at the time. It was around I don't think I detailed exactly what my thought processes were around the various hypotheses that I had.
Looking back now, is that something that you maybe wish you had
Yeah, and
done?
I mean, I think it's the policy files have came a long way since 2015. I mean, round about a more thorough, detailed approach to what you're actually completing and writing down as such. So, again, that was a period in time where the policy file which I was completing was really kind of quick, short time, high priority actions, and more so now I would probably detail and a lot of detail around about the hypotheses that I was working through in my mind as such, so that there's that rationale and accountability around it.
Nowadays, with the policy file, is there a section that identifies an area where you should note down your working hypotheses?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you, unless it's changed recently. There wasn't, but it may have changed over the last couple of years.
But in terms of your own personal practice, that's something that you now do, is note down hypotheses?
Yeah, it's something I've always done, is not note down, but something I've always kind of kept an open mind around about what exactly are we dealing with at this particular stage. Now, in 2015, a number of people would probably, a number of SIOs may have written them down and detailed them. I worked them through in my mind. I mean, I took time to basically work out exactly what we had and thereafter focus on what the priority hypotheses were, which is the ones we've already discussed.
So you've always worked through that process in your mind. When did you start noting down those hypotheses in your policy file?
I'm not actually that sure, to be honest with you. I mean, I need to look back at the various policy files that I've done since 2015, to be honest with you, to basically give you that answer.
But in 2015, it's not something that you were...
It's not something I was doing, no.
I just want to check, it's not that this is the only incident where you didn't note down your hypotheses? No. It's a more recent development in your practice,
yes.
Is it?
Yes.
Thank you. Can I move on and ask you a little about Colette Bell's call to the police in the morning?
Yep.
We've heard evidence from D.S. Dursley and D.I. Robson that they were very conscious that there could be a possible link between the reason she'd called the police and the mail and the events at Hayfield Road. Was that something that was brought to your attention? Yeah,
it was brought to my attention by Colin Robson at the briefing that myself and him had around about between 10 and 10:30. When about the development of the various priorities and thereafter the linked incidents, which is in my daybook there. So again, the aspect of Colette Bell, it was really significant round about the call card and what that detailed.
Can I just ask you about the timings of that? We've heard evidence that Colette Bell called at 8:36 in the morning, that DC Mitchell and DC Parker were sent to the house to do what they described as a welfare check on Colette Bell and the property, and they arrived approximately 9:15 in the morning and waited for her to return to the house. She had a baby at that time, about 15 weeks old, and she was with her mother, Lorraine Bell. At the time that Mitchell and Parker were sent to the house, you weren't aware that there was a possible connection then? Were you aware that anyone had been sent to Colette Bell's house? So in terms of your involvement with that location, you had no knowledge, influence or responsibility in relation to that?
No, I can remember speaking to Colin around it and saying how relevant that was, and he explained to me that this action was already in progress. I think he said to me Colette Bell was already at the office at that stage.
So by the time you had this briefing between 10 and 10:30, you think Colette Bell had already been brought to Kirkcaldy?
Yeah, or was en route, one or other. I think I know that was. I think that was the update I got.
So all the decisions that were made in relation to Colette Bell and her property and being brought to Kirkcaldy Police Office were not done by you.
No.
And in fact, you didn't have any awareness until that briefing with Colin Robson.
Yes, correct.
And so was it Colin Robson who was handling that matter before he spoke to you?
Yes, and I mean, because I'd said to him, I says, do we have someone basically action to basically go and speak to Colette? And they said it's all in hand. He either said she's en route or she's in the office just now.
Right. Did you have any involvement with arrangements to bring her into Kirkcaldy, or taking a route? We've heard she went into the number 1 interview room in Kirkcaldy. Did you have any involvement with that?
No.
Tell us about this briefing with Colin Robson between 10 and 10:30.
So again, it was to identify the priorities, and again, Colin has the call cards printed out in front of him, or he's got the hard copies, I believe, at that time, and we're talking through the various call cards that appear to be relevant to the incident that we're dealing with at that time. And I think probably the page, don't know how to say it's at the top of that page. It's
Yes,
death in custody,
if we can
Kirkcaldy.
maybe just come down slightly. Sorry,
The other
go
way,
up.
yeah.
Sorry, I
So
always do that.
it's that aspect, the death in custody, Kirkcaldy, which I've got DI Colin Robson opposite that.
Right. Yes.
So again, what you've got is that I've got Henry Road, Kirkcaldy, and it's quite exact timings, which is reflective of the call card. So 07:14 hours, and Colin's read out exactly what is said on the call card.
So is this Colin Robson had brought call cards with him for the briefing?
Yeah. So I've simply written down what he's given me, and I've asked him to. I'm saying who are the callers, or who has reported that, and you'll see to the right hand side of that there's TST, and then there's REP, which is reporter, and then there's 2 names. I think Harry somebody or other, and then there's reporter Linda.
I won't ask you to mention all the names, but we have heard evidence from a Harry Kohlberg,
Right.
who was a caller, and we heard evidence he made 2 calls.
Yeah, sorry, all I'm trying to indicate there is that I've identified that as an urgent action. So TST is to take statement. So at that time when I'm going through the call cards, in my mind I'm basically saying priority, let's get statements for these individuals. So the TST is the action I'm thereafter generating in respect to that.
And I can't read your writing there, but then the other one may be a Linda
Lambert, I think it is.
Lambert, and we heard evidence from a Linda Lambert as well.
Yeah.
So these were direct references to calls that had been made to the police that morning.
That's correct.
And then underneath, what does it say? Is this you noting down things from the call cards?
So yeah, so Colin's reading the call card out to me. So it's 07, is basically what has been read out to me. African looking male chasing complainers' cars, jumping in front of them and stopping them.
Right.
So again, all I've took is the main aspect of what the call card says, and thereafter developed the actions around that.
Okay. And then the second thing that you have there is, does that say Hayfield Road?
Yeah.
And what do you have here?
So Hayfield Road, Kirkcaldy, so 07:15 hours, black male in possession of a large knife, white t-shirt, no jacket, 9-inch knife, male subdued, asp strike, CS spray, hospital, Victoria Hospital. And then there's 2, again, witnesses above that. I think it's Joyce and Alan Pearson, I think it is.
Yes.
And again, that's the calls that have come in at that time from the individuals. So Colin's read the call card out, and I've reduced what he has said to me into that synopsis as such.
Right. And where it says male subdued, what was the reference after that? Did you say
It's
ASP?
ASP strike, which is a baton strike, ASP,
baton.
ASP, yeah.
So you were aware at that time that the man had been struck with a baton
Yes,
and CS spray.
yes.
And then the third entry is again this a note from the call cards.
Yeah.
And we have a redaction in this section which is in relation to Colette Bell's address. But where it says Bell, can you tell us what you've said there?
Yeah, so again, it's come for the call card. Bell came into the house at her address to to find house trashed. She had received call from deceased friend stating he had been assaulted by her boyfriend. Assault took place about 1 hour ago in Kirkcaldy.
And we've got a redaction on the line under that, but what's the first entry there? Does it say first phone?
First phone in here, second person. I can't understand exactly what I've written there, unfortunately. It's something to do with, I don't know if there's been 2 calls or the phone back and there's been further communication around that.
So again, was this from a call card, or was
Yeah,
this
I believe it was.
information from
I believe it was a
Colin
call
Robson?
card, yeah.
Call card.
And I've got an action there about take statement for Colette Bell, and that's that discussion I said I had with Colin, who informed me that that's in hand.
So in terms of the instruction to take a statement from Colette Bell, had arrangements already been put in place
They
by
had.
the time of this briefing?
Yes.
Did you approve those, or did you have any input in that at all?
It was. I believe it was ongoing, or it was about to commence. But I did agree with the fact that she did require an interview.
Can you explain to us why you agreed with that?
She's a significant witness. In respect of she has contacted the police with a concern for the deceased. So it was critical that we engaged with Colette as soon as possible to find out what is the background to this incident we're dealing with. Can you fill in some of the blanks to support some of the hypotheses that I have at that particular time? And again, even who is the deceased at Victoria Hospital? I mean, can we identify who this is at this particular time? So she was a really significant witness.
Right. Did you have any input at that time about the death message?
No.
Did you have any input into the wording of the death
No.
message? When or where it was relayed?
No.
Were you aware at the time of this briefing whether there had been a death message relayed?
No, it hadn't been done at that time.
Not done. Did you ask Colin Robson about the possibility of a death message? No. Why not?
My understanding was she was either not at the office or she was en route to the police office at that stage. So it was very early on. My expectation was that we were unsure exactly how relevant Colette Bell was at that particular time. Although, with my experience, I thought there was something significant with what she was telling us. But again, the aspect of death message to Colette at that time didn't cross my mind, to be honest with you. I wanted to get a more kind of updated version of exactly what was she reporting, what was her concern, and I mean, who was she concerned about, and when was the last time she'd seen the person that she was reporting missing, and so on. So again, it was very early on with that. So I was more concerned about, or more interested in the fact is that what does Colette Bell have to almost offer the investigation and provide us with that information in respect of it.
I do want to go into this in a little more detail, but I'm conscious it's now.
That's a convenient point. We'll stop for lunch and sit at 2 o'clock.